Okay, so now we're back in Clarice, and let's have a look at importing our textures. So in my shaders context, I'll just create a new context, and I'll call it textures. And let's just go in here and go to File, Import Texture, Streaming Map. Okay, let's go in the Textures folder, and let's select the Seamless folder, and select all of these, and open, and let's select them all here and contextualize, and I'm going to call these Seamless, and I'll also import the shanty textures, which are not seamless. Select all, open, and let's contextualize these and call them shanty. Okay, so in our shaders, let's create a new folder, and we're gonna call this red_bricks, and let's dive in. In here, let's duplicate this, and we're gonna call it red_bricks_triplanar. Click OK, and let's scroll down. Let's disable the override material, and in our red bricks folder, let's create actually in our shading layers, let's create a new shading layer, and we're gonna call this red bricks SL. Let's just call this red bricks 1 SL. And back in our red bricks folder, let's create a new material matte. We can close that, I think. And we'll call this red bricks 1. And here we'll create a texture triplanar and attach this to the color. And in our shading layer, we will create only one rule, which will be star for everything, and material will select our red bricks material. Actually here, yeah, I think it might be better if here, instead of the red bricks, let's just call this triplanars. And we'll put, yeah, and then within this, we'll contextualize, and this will be red bricks 1. So slightly cleaner. So let's have a look at our shading layer. Okay, that works. And here, let's apply this shading layer. Okay, so now what we want to do is go in here, and if I bring in my red bricks texture map, what I can do is I can plug it in to all of these. And now you see we have our red bricks applied to everything, but currently it's applied on the object level. So because the water is just a single polygrid with just that single polygon, and there's no, how should I put it? Basically the UV of it is the whole square, so it's really stretched here, but then here all of the objects are getting the red bricks applied at their scale level, so that's not good. We want to go in and adjust this, and we can we do it here? Yep. So here we can do, instead of object, we can select world, and so now this is correct but very tiny. And so what we can do is go here into our red bricks map and increase the scale of the UVs. Okay, and now we can see that we have the bricks applied to absolutely everything. So the one thing to watch out for is scale. Currently this is actually too big. If you remember this, or if you can see, I guess, this is where the arch on this screen left midground tower is, and this is supposed to be gigantic, and these bricks are currently very massive. So let's reduce this to maybe, I guess, 40. Let's see. That's still far too big. Maybe 20. That's maybe about the correct scale, actually. Either way, what I would recommend doing is, for example, rendering out one render with one scale and then like another with a slightly different one. And so from this one texture, you can get several different renders for you to use in your matte painting later. So as you can see, we have this texture applied to absolutely everything. And what we will do in Photoshop is multiply this with our environment light and the distant light render passes. So as an example here, if I enable my environment light, and let's just select a small little bit, let's just render this, and if I add my distant light as a screen, and then I take my red bricks triplanar, just to explain, and I multiply, and we give it a few. Okay, so we've got these multiplied together, and it's very dark, but if I increase this brightness here, you can see that by multiplying my red bricks texture, I'm able to kind of achieve a decent look. And if I do this several times, maybe make different scale versions of it, and then use, for example, one of my IDs. So maybe I'll only be applying it to, the blue element here or the green one here. I will be able to get quite a lot of variation when combined with using the other textures as well. So for now, let's just turn everything back to normal. Okay. So even though it's nonsensical right now and it looks strange, this will be very useful. And one thing here to basically show you the workflow is we will want to just copy this setup and just replace the texture in order to create our new shading layers and our new render passes here. But what we want to do is we want to save a little bit of time, and if I just have to redo this every time. Plugging this in 6 times takes quite a while. So again, I think it's a good idea to create a dummy node. So let's just put in a hue, and we're gonna put in, in the name attribute, we're gonna put in triplanar input. And we're not going to do anything with this, but what we'll instead do is we'll plug this into everything. Okay, and now I can just plug my red bricks into this. So each time I copy this setup, I'll only have to plug in my texture once instead of having to do it 6 times, because I'll copy these together. So for example, let's copy this and make white bricks 1, and let's dive in. Let's rename this white bricks, and let's find our white bricks map, and let's just plug this in here. And so now let's duplicate this, and we're going to call this white bricks triplanar. Okay, and let's go to our shading layers, and let's create a white bricks SL. And here, let's just change the material to our new one. And here in the triplanar, we'll select our new shading layer. And one last thing we have to do is go into our white bricks texture map, and let's just increase the UV scale to maybe 20. And now, as you can see, we have our white bricks applied to everything instead. And so now we have 2 of these created, and the first one takes a little bit of setup time, but after that it is very quick. And I would recommend creating maybe 10, maybe 20 of these, depending on how many different materials you plan to have in your scene, because this will save you a lot of time later. So it's a little bit of time that you have to spend now, but it is still much quicker than having to texture every object separately. And if you have hundreds of different objects in your scene, that is just crazy to do it that way. So feel free to repeat this process another 10 times in your project, and we'll move on to the next bit. So what we have done here with triplanar is cool, but I'll show you another trick for creating a randomized application of textures, which we'll use for all of our shanty houses and the balconies, in order to apply the textures that we made, the shanty textures that we made, randomly to each of those objects. So here's an example. Let's, in our shaders, create a new context, and we will call this shanties. And in here we'll make a new material mat, and we'll call this shanty1 underscore mat. And in our shading layers, let's create a new shading layer, and we'll call this shanty1 SL. And let's create a couple of rules. The bottom one, we want everything to be black, so let's select our black matte material from earlier. And then the second one, we want anything called shanty to be our new shanty1 matte. And let's create a new layer, and let's just replace the shading layer. Okay, and now in here, let's do some adjustments in the network. So let's create first a fractal noise, then a support color texture support color. And lastly, texture instance color. And let's create a switch node. So texture switch. And for now, just for this example, let's create a constant color. And let's just copy this a couple of times. Here, the first one we'll make red. Second one we'll make green. And third one we'll make blue. And let's plug all of these into the switch as textures. And we'll replace these with our actual textures later, but this is a good way to show what is happening. And let's connect the instance color to the input of the switch, the support color into the color here, and the fractal noise into the color of the support color. And in the fractal noise, let's change the projection to cubic and world. Okay, so now if I connect this to the color here, we see that all of our shanty houses have either the red, the green, or the blue applied randomly to them. So how does this work? Well, first of all, we have the fractal noise. And the values of this range from black to white randomly, and because it's applied to world, we basically have the fractal noise texture applied to everything. If I do this here, you can see that we have the fractal noise applied to all the houses. So what this is doing is this is providing its values ranging from black, and this drives which of these textures is selected in the switch node based on the values ranging from black to white. The support color allows this to be utilized by the instance color, and the instance color basically allows our scattered objects to switch between these provided textures based on this. So as you can see, these are all quite random. And now if instead of these colors I go into my shanty textures and bring in 1 to 11 for now. So I have all of these here. And let's just delete these. So we have a bunch of these. Okay. And instead of connecting them one by one, it's actually maybe easier to go into the switch and go into the textures and click add. And if we go here, select these. And so now you can see that all of these textures are randomly applied to these buildings. And the cool thing is if I change any of the values here, it'll change where all of these textures appear. So theoretically, you can have as many different variations of this as you want. You know, if you're liking the textures in general, but maybe not one area, you can just change this value slightly, and it'll recalculate the assignment of these textures onto the objects based on the fractal noise which you've just changed. So it's very powerful. And so instead of just having one, let's maybe have 2 different ones, or 2 different setups. And so what we could do, turn all these off. What we could do is go into our, actually just, first of all, let's contextualize these. And we're going to call this Shanty 1. And let's copy this. We have our Shanty 2. Cool. And here in the switch, let's remove all of these. And let's add numbers 12 to 16. Okay. And so now what we could do instead is go to our shading layers, into our Shanty 1 shading layer, and for example we could just add another layer here. Let's put it at the top, and let's call this balcony. And now we have applied the other textures onto all of our balconies. And so we can utilize this later on. And instead, for example, we could even render this once, and then a second time where we have these switched, like so. And this is in fact what I did in my original project as I was creating the artwork. So I provided myself with a little bit of extra variety and choice. Or for example, even more interestingly maybe, let's go back, what we could do is improve this even a little bit more. So what we could do is go into our shanties, and here in Shanty 1, or actually here in our base shanties folder, let's just create a new material, legacy mix, and let's into input 1 put in Shanty 1, and into input 2 Shanty 2. And we could instead here select our mix, and so currently these are sort of mixed in a way that's not perfect. They're just kind of blending over each other. But what we could do is, for example, put this here, actually let's separate these out slightly more. Put all those there. That's more like it. What we could do, for example, is here select create a texture triplanar, for the first one, and we'll plug in 2 texture constants. So one I want to be white, the other one I want to be black. I'll plug the white into tops and black into everything else. Actually, just for now, let's select this material again. And I want to take my triplanar and just plug it into the mix function of the mix material. And here let's select mix. So now you can see my triplanar has, if I just for example, just to show again, if I disconnect these two and I just make a material mat to plug this into, just to show. Actually, I didn't need to disconnect them. Just mat. You can see that here, using the triplanar, I've selected the tops and made them white, and everything else black. So when we use that as a way to mix these two different Shanty 1 and Shanty 2 materials, we get the rooftops to be one texture and the sides to be another. So you can have like a little bit of a play around like that, or you can choose to have that control in Photoshop. That's up to you, really. You know, you can't go wrong by having too much choice here. So this is a great and useful way of doing this. And you know, the more of this kind of setup you can have, the better, because again, you want to automate as much of this texture application as you can, so you have to do less of it in Photoshop. Because if you think about it, if I didn't apply any of these textures and I wanted to do them just in matte painting in Photoshop, I'd have to do them individually. I'd have to transform and skew and warp all of my textures myself, one by one, for all of these buildings, and that would take a very long time. But this way, we get a very automated process and great results once we actually combine these in Photoshop later on. And so that's us mostly done on the texturing. One last thing to mention is, for example, in your instance color, you can select parent level. So for example, if you have scattered trees, and on the trees you have scattered leaves, you can choose to apply this to different levels of your system. So currently it's randomized at the parent level of 1, so that would be trees. And then if you want to instead randomize the colors for leaves, you could change this to 2. And here you can see we have like a much finer selection of these textures, so you can play around with that as well. But that is all for texturing. In the next video, we're going to have a quick look at rendering all of our different layers out, and after that we're going to jump into Photoshop, where we will start matte painting.